An autopsy was about to begin in the mortuary, but when the young woman's eyes opened, everything changed. In this story, you will discover shocking secrets that even death could not conceal. Before starting the story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Let us know your favorite part of the story in the comments. The sound of the clock echoed in the silent morgue, the strong smell of cleaning products mixed with the bitter cold of the place. Dr. Daniel Salgado adjusted his glasses on his face, a habit he always had when he needed to concentrate. In front of him on the metal table was the body of a young woman. He stood still for a few moments, just observing her. The cold light made her skin look almost translucent, that he always wore when he needed to concentrate. In front of him on the metal table lay the body of a young woman. He stood still for a few moments, just watching her. The cold light made her skin look almost translucent, pale as porcelain. Her face was serene, her lips slightly parted, her long eyelashes resting on her cheeks. She looked alive, as if she were only asleep, waiting for someone to wake her with a whisper. Daniel felt a lump in his throat, something that didn't usually happen to him. He had been working with bodies for years, analyzing the marks of death like a detective reconstructing the last moments of a life. But there was something about this young woman that disturbed him. He swallowed hard. "Who are you?" he whispered softly, as if expecting an answer. But of course, none came. He checked the file next to the body. Lucia Benitez, 25 years old, found unconscious in an alley behind a luxury hotel with no apparent signs of violence. Death certificate signed by the emergency room. Something didn't add up. He had seen hundreds of bodies, but there was one detail, a strange feeling inside him, as if he were facing a puzzle with the most important piece missing. He took a deep breath, trying to ignore that feeling. It was just another case, just another autopsy. The morgue door opened with a slight squeak. The smell of the street and the night entered the cold room. Jason walked in with his usual relaxed but attentive attitude, carrying a greasy paper bag in his hand. "I brought tacos. If I don't take care of you, who will?" Daniel didn't respond right away. He stood there still, staring at the young woman's body with a lost look in his eyes. Jason approached and frowned. "Are you listening to me?" Daniel blinked as if he had come out of a trance and let out a sigh, and without looking away, said in a low voice, "Something's weird here." Jason snorted, pulled out a chair, and slumped into it carelessly. "You always say that. Something's weird. You work with dead people, Daniel. Nothing is normal in this weird place." But Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't joke. He just kept watching the young woman on the metal table. "It's not that," he insisted. "It's different." Jason opened the bag, took out a taco, and took a noisy bite, loudly. "Come on, tell me what's strange about her." The girl stared at her for a moment. "How pretty. Such a waste." Daniel took a deep breath. "She doesn't look dead." Jason stopped chewing. For a second, he swallowed slowly. "What?" Daniel leaned a little closer to the body. "Look at her, Jason. I've seen hundreds of bodies, and death always leaves a mark. The skin loses its shine, the muscles become stiff, there's a heavy silence. But this girl, she looks like she's going to open her eyes any minute." Jason looked at the young woman, and although he wanted to laugh at his friend's concern, he felt a chill. It was true. Her face was too calm, as if she were just asleep. He wiped his hands on the taco paper and tried to lighten the mood. Maybe it was a peaceful death, a heart attack, who knows? Daniel narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "Maybe, but something here isn't right." Jason sighed. He knew that tone of voice. "Here you go again with your intuition." "My intuition never—" Jason raised his hands. Okay. What do you want to do?" Daniel remained silent, thinking. "Without taking my eyes off the girl, I'm going to find out what happened to her." Jason just watched him. He had known Daniel for years and knew that when he got something in his head, there was no one who could change his mind. "You need a life, brother," Jason said, taking another bite of his taco. "You live here locked up in this morgue. How do you expect anyone to want to go out with a guy who dines next to dead people?" Daniel didn't take his eyes off the girl at the table. He just shrugged and adjusted his glasses. "The living scare me more than the dead." Jason let out a short laugh, but there was something sad about it. "That's not normal, Daniel." "Maybe not, but it's what I know how to do." Jason crossed his arms and looked at him silently. He knew that behind that coldness, that habit of hiding in his work, there was a weight that Daniel carried alone. You used to be different. Remember when we played football? When we spent our afternoons dreaming of the future? Daniel dried his hands and turned to him, his eyes shining bitterly. Dreams don't pay the bills, Jason. His friend sighed heavily and shrugged. But at least they make you feel alive. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't know exactly when he had started to shut himself off, when he had given up on life outside. Maybe it was when he gave up football, or maybe when he realized he could never be what his family expected of him. Daniel handed the report to Jason, who took it with one hand while holding the rest of his taco with the other. He quickly turned the pages, his eyes scanning the information. "Everything normal so far," Daniel muttered. No answer. He crossed his arms and looked at the young woman's body on the metal table. Jason continued reading. Cause of death, still inconclusive. Toxicology, clean. No signs of assault. He looked up. Are you telling me this girl just dropped dead, and no one knows why? Daniel pressed his lips together and shook his head. That's what bothers me. No marks. No signs of violence. She just died. Jason frowned and put the paper down on the table. That happens. No. Daniel ran his hand over his face. Yes, people have heart attacks, aneurysms, allergic reactions, but something here doesn't add up. He turned back to the body, his eyes analyzing every detail, the dark hair falling over her shoulders, her face too calm. Have you ever seen a body that looks like it's going to wake up at any moment? Jason let out a slight laugh. Daniel, you're tired. You're seeing things that aren't there. But Daniel knew it wasn't just tiredness. It was something deeper. Jason pushed the papers back at him. Whatever it is, you'll find out. You always do. Daniel took the report, but didn't even look at it. His eyes remained fixed on the young woman in front of him. Jason laughed, that slight, mocking laugh as he crossed his arms and leaned back on the metal table. Did you know your family still thinks you'd be a great footballer? Daniel didn't respond. He just closed his eyes for a second and sighed heavily. He had heard that so many times that it sounded like a broken record playing in his head. My mom still talks about it, he asked without looking at Jason. Your mom, your dad, your uncle, even your grandmother, they all still believe you would have been the best in the family. Daniel let out a short, half-hearted laugh. Ha, they believed it. I never did. Jason took the last piece of taco and took a bite. Before speaking, his mouth still full, he said, Well, I remember how you played. You were good, Daniel. Daniel finally turned to look at his friend, his eyes filled with a long-standing weariness. Something that came from years ago, something he didn't like to remember. That doesn't matter anymore, Jason. He noticed the tone in his voice and changed the subject, looking back at the young woman's report on the table. But even though they said nothing more, the past had been awakened within Daniel. The memories came flooding back without him calling them up. The football field, the hot sun beating down on his face, the cheers of the fans, his dad in the stands waiting to see him shine. He remembered the pressure of the weight of each shot, the gaze of the coaches. His dad, Héctor Salgado, was not just any man. He was a famous former player, idol of a big team, a respected name in Mexican football. When Daniel was born, it was already written that he would follow the same path. From the age of 4, he kicked balls before learning to tie his shoelaces. At 6, he entered his first football school. At 9, he trained every day, rain or shine. His father always said that talent was important, but discipline was everything. Do you want to be a great player, son? Hector would ask as he tied Daniel's football boots. With his legs still thin and his eyes wide open, he just nodded. He didn't want to disappoint, but over time, something inside him began to change. While the other children dreamed of goals and trophies, he stared at the falls, the injuries, the expressions of pain. He remembered the day a friend twisted his ankle and lay crying on the ground. While everyone was worried about the game, Daniel knelt beside him, observing the swelling, touching it carefully, trying to understand what was happening to the muscles, the bones, the skin. You have to play, the coach shouted. Feel it! But he didn't want to play. He wanted to understand. On quiet nights, while his dad watched replays of old matches, Daniel read books about the human body. He hid the anatomy books under his bed, as if they were forbidden secrets. and the more he read, the more he wanted to know how the heart beat, how the lungs carried air into the lungs. Why did some people get sick and others didn't? But he never said anything. He knew his dad would never accept it. He knew his family only expected one thing from him, to be the next big name in football. So he kept playing and kept pretending that was his dream too. Daniel remembered exactly the moment he saw Camila for the first time. She appeared on the youth field like a hurricane, her curly hair tied back in a messy ponytail, her eyes shining with excitement, and a mischievous smile that seemed to hold all the secrets of the world. "Are you training or just staring into space?" she asked, crossing her arms. The boys laughed. Some rolled their eyes. Others ignored her, but Daniel couldn't look away. Camila played football as if she had been born to do so. Agile, fast, light, and she spoke to him in a different way. Not with everyone's expectations, not with the pressure of her father or the coaches, but with curiosity. "You don't like football that much, do you?" she asked one day after training, sitting down next to him on the grass. Daniel frowned in surprise. "What do you mean I don't?" "Of course I like it," he said. She giggled. "You don't play well, but you don't like it." He wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but it was as if she could see right through him, and he liked that. The months that followed, Daniel began to enjoy her company more than anything else. They talked after training, sent each other messages during class, and shared food in the stands. He had never felt anything like this before. Daniel spent days rehearsing in his head, repeating the words, trying to imagine the perfect moment. Camila had always been different from anyone he knew. Not only was she pretty, she was strong, determined, funny, and he liked her. He really liked her. That afternoon, training had harder than usual. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange. Some players were still kicking the ball towards the goal, while others were sitting in the stands laughing and chatting. Camila was among them, her hair tied back, a bottle of water in her hand. Daniel's heart was beating so hard, he felt like it was going to jump out of his chest, but he took a deep breath and walked towards her. "Camila, can I talk to you for a minute?" She raised her eyebrows, intrigued, but stood up. "Sure." Daniel led her to a spot a little further away from the others. His face was hot, and not just from the training. He swallowed, feeling his sweaty hands. "I wanted to tell you that I really like you." The silence stretched out for a second. Then Camila let out a short laugh, as if she had heard a joke. "Oh, Daniel." He forced a shy smile. "What's up?" But before she could answer, one of the team members approached. "What's up, guys?" Camila looked at Daniel, then at her friends who were starting to pay attention. "She says she likes me." And then she laughed, but it wasn't a discreet laugh. It wasn't a nervous or friendly laugh. It was a loud, mocking laugh that echoed across the field. The others started laughing too. "Daniel, you're kidding," one of the guys teased, the star player of the team. Camila shook her head, still laughing. "Please, Daniel, you don't even look like you have the blood of a real player. You're not even good enough to be a ball boy." Daniel felt his face burning, but now it was from embarrassment. The laughter around him grew louder, each laugh feeling like a blow. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't move. He just stood there while his dream of being special to someone was shattered in front of everyone. The echo of Camila's laughter lingered in Daniel's head, even when he was in the changing room, even when he splashed water on his face to try to calm down. But it was no use. It wasn't just because of her. It wasn't just because of the humiliation. It was the full weight of his father's gaze in the stands, the pressure from the team, the coach's family, the feeling that he was living a role he never wanted to play. He left the changing room without speaking to anyone. But the field was still full. Training was over, but the players were still talking and laughing. Camila was still there, surrounded by friends, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just broken something inside him. Daniel stopped in the middle of the field, the smell of wet grass, the sound of trainers scraping the ground, the wind blowing softly. Everything felt distant. Everything felt small. Without thinking twice, he bent down and untied his studs. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his heart pounding. When he finished, he grabbed them tightly and without hesitation threw them to the ground with all the rage he had stored up for years. The impact caused some players to turn around. "What's wrong with you, Daniel?" "Have you gone mad?" someone asked, laughing. But he didn't answer. He just turned his back and started to walk away from the field. That's when he heard his father's voice. Daniel stopped and closed his eyes for a second before turning around. Hector Salgado came down from the stands with heavy steps, his face red, his eyes shining with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Daniel looked at the cleats on the grass, and then at his father. "I don't want this anymore." Hector frowned as if he had heard wrong. "What do you mean? You trained your whole life for this. You were born for this. You're the best on the team." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "No, Dad. I trained because you wanted me to, but I never wanted to." The silence was heavy. His father's gaze changed from anger to disbelief, as if he were seeing his son for the first time. "Are you saying you wasted years of your life?" Daniel took a deep breath. It wasn't my years that were wasted. It was the first time he had ever seen his father speechless. But he didn't wait. He just grabbed his backpack and kept walking. He didn't look back. He knew he would never set foot on that field again. That night, the house was silent. Daniel went up to his room without saying a word. He closed the door and stood there in the middle of the room, staring at the walls as if he were in a place that was no longer his. Outside, he could hear his parents talking in the living room. He didn't need to understand the words to know what they were saying. The son, who was supposed to be a football star, no longer wanted to play. What would others think? What would his friends, neighbors, and coaches say? But Daniel no longer cared. The next morning, when he went down for breakfast, he found his father sitting at the table with his arms crossed, staring at him. "Today, you're going back to training." Daniel gripped his cup tightly. "I already told you I'm not going." His father's chair creaked as he stood up. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're throwing your life away." Daniel's face burned with rage. "My life or yours?" His mother, who had been silent, gasped in surprise at his response. But Daniel didn't stop. "I never wanted this, Dad. I just wanted you to ask me once." Hector's face turned red. "Then what do you want, Daniel? If not football?" Daniel opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out because, deep down, he didn't know either. The following days were full of arguments. His dad tried to convince him in every way possible. The team coach came to his house. Even his grandmother called to tell him to think it over. When they saw that nothing was working, the second part came, the punishment. They forbade him from going out, took away his privileges, and even sent him to therapy. He sat in the padded chair and listened to the therapist ask him about his feelings. But all he could think about was that for the first time, his feelings were his alone. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to express what he wanted. That was how he discovered medicine in the school library. He took books on the human body, on diseases, on anatomy. He remembered the day a teammate twisted his ankle on the field, and he was more curious about the injury than the game. That was it. He didn't want to play. He wanted to understand football. It was excitement, speed competition, but medicine was mystery. It was logic. It was saving lives. And curiously, that was how he chose to work with the dead. They didn't scream. They didn't demand. And above all, they never expected anyone other than Jason. He glanced through the report without much haste, his eyes scanning the papers as if he already knew he wouldn't find anything new there. Daniel, on the other hand, wasn't paying attention. His eyes were fixed on the young woman on the table. He seemed to wake up from a trance, and her gaze went straight to the body. She took a deep breath, adjusted her glasses, and picked up the scalpel. Her hand was steady as always. He leaned forward slightly and placed the blade on the pale skin, ready for the first cut. And then she stopped. Her eyes flew open. Her skin trembled. It was almost imperceptible, a small but real movement. He felt a faint resistance under the skin. She felt something beating there. It couldn't be. Daniel took a step back, feeling his heart race. "Jason." His voice came out low and shaky. His friend looked up from the papers. "What's wrong, Daniel?" He looked at him, still holding the scalpel with his hand frozen in the air. She moved. Jason frowned and let out a nervous laugh. "What moved?" Daniel looked at the young woman again, feeling his chest tighten with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He didn't want to seem crazy. He didn't. He didn't want to doubt his own sanity, but he was sure of what he saw. He leaned closer again, observing every detail. Her skin seemed warmer than it should be. He brought his hand to her neck, searching for a pulse. Even though he knew it was impossible, that's when he felt it. Weak and irregular, but real. Her heart was beating. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The scalpel fell to the floor with a sharp sound. Jason noticed the change in his friend's expression and stood up. "Daniel, what the hell is going on?" Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at the body in front of him, feeling his breathing become heavy. Jason took 2 steps forward, trying to get a better look. "Daniel, are you sure this can be?" Before he could finish, a soft sound filled the room. A moan. The two of them stood motionless. It was a faint sound, almost like a sigh, but enough to turn the morgue into a completely different. Jason swallowed. That was her. Daniel couldn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the young woman's parted lips. Another moan, this time a little louder. That's when her eyelids fluttered. And then slowly, as if waking from a deep sleep, the young woman's eyes opened. Jason acted on instinct. His hand went straight to his gun holster, pulling it out in one swift motion. "What the hell is going on?" His voice came out tense, his eyes wide open. Daniel, still in shock, raised his hands in a gesture of calm. "Jason, wait," he said. His heart was beating so fast, it felt like it was going to burst out of his chest. "She's awake. Put that gun down." Jason held the gun tightly, still trying to process what he was seeing. The girl blinked several times, her eyes confused, as if she were waking up from a deep nightmare. Her breathing was slow and irregular, and her chest rose and fell slowly. He took a step forward. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. "Hey, can you hear me?" The young woman slowly turned her face towards him, her gaze lost as if she did not recognize where she was. Jason still had not lowered his gun. "Daniel, this doesn't make sense." His voice was low, but tense. "I know," Daniel replied, without taking his eyes off the girl. "But she's alive. Put it down." The young woman tried to open her mouth to speak, but only a hoarse sound came out. She looked weak, as if she had just come out of a coma. Her gaze met Daniel's, and he felt a chill run down his spine. There was fear there, confusion. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Don't try to talk. You're still safe." Jason finally lowered his gun a little, but he still looked suspicious. "This shouldn't be happening." Daniel ignored the comment. "This is a miracle." The girl blinked slowly and tried to make another sound. This time she succeeded. "Where am I?" Her voice came out weak, almost a whisper. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. In the morgue, the girl's eyes flew open. She blinked repeatedly, trying to understand where she was. She tried to recognize the shadows and lights around her. Her face showed confusion, fear, fragility. Daniel watched every detail. Her chest rose and fell with difficulty. Her lips were dry, and her skin still had the pale tone of someone who had spent too much time away from life. She tried to speak again, but her voice was only a whisper. Jason, still nervous, looked from Daniel to the girl, and then back to Daniel. "What do we do now?" Daniel took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He had to think. He had to act like a doctor, but his heart was beating wildly, his mind a whirlwind. The young woman slowly turned her face towards him, her eyes, previously lost, now seeking some kind of reassurance and explanation, something that made sense. "You're safe," was all he could say. She frowned, her breathing becoming a little heavier. Her fingers moved slightly, as if trying to cling to some certainty, but she found only the white sheet of the morgue. Daniel noticed her discomfort and leaned in a little closer, trying to speak calmly. "Do you remember anything? Your name? Where you live?" She closed her eyes tightly, trying to bring back some memory. Anything, and then a word came out, faint but real. "Lucia." Daniel and Jason looked at each other. "Your name is Lucia." She opened her eyes slowly and nodded slightly. "I think so." Daniel tried to go further. "And your surname?" Lucia frowned. "I don't know." Her gaze wandered again. "What else should I remember? What else was part of her?" Daniel realized that insisting could make things worse. The memory seemed fragile, like glass about to shatter. But before he could tell her not to force herself, Lucia whispered something else. "I worked in a hotel." Jason crossed his arms, beginning to connect the pieces. "A hotel?" Lucia blinked several times and confirmed. It was a big, beautiful hotel. The image appeared in her head in a blur. Shiny chandeliers, marble floors, well-dressed people, coming and going. Daniel memorized that detail. Do you remember the name of the hotel? She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to concentrate, but it was as if the memory was slipping away before it could fully form. No, Daniel didn't insist. Lucia took a deep breath, trying to remember more, and then a new image emerged. It wasn't of the hotel, it wasn't of work, it was of an accessory, a black bracelet. Daniel and Jason looked at each other again. Black bracelet? Jason asked. Lucia nodded slowly. I remember a man wearing a black bracelet. He was talking to me. I think he was holding my arm. Suddenly, her breathing became more agitated, and her heart raced. Daniel noticed it right away. It's okay. Don't force yourself anymore. Lucia put her hand to her head. Everything is… I don't remember. What happened next? I only remember the bracelet. Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've remembered enough. Take it easy. Lucia swallowed and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her thoughts. Daniel watched silently. He had seen many things in that amphitheater. Bodies that carried stories, secrets, marks of interrupted lives. But he had never seen anyone come back from the dead without knowing who they were. Jason, still confident, touched the holster of his gun. Before we talk, we have to find someone from your family. Lucia looked up slowly. I don't have a family. That sentence sounded small, but carried enormous weight. Jason frowned. No one? Lucia shook her head. I don't think so. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. Alone. There was something painful about that word. Jason scratched the back of his neck, trying to find a solution. Well, she can't stay here. We can take her to the police station to see if there are any missing person reports. Lucia lowered her head. The idea of being at a police station, of being treated like a stranger with no identity, made her throat tighten. Daniel noticed. No, Jason. She looked at him. What do you mean, no? Daniel took a deep breath. I'm not going to send her to a place where no one will take care of her. And we don't even know what happened. Jason crossed his arms. What do you suggest? Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at Lucia. So fragile, so lost. If he let her go, where would she go? Who would protect her? Without thinking too much, he reached into his pocket and took out a key ring. He held it out to her. Lucia looked at the key without understanding what it was. Daniel took a deep breath. My house. Jason opened his eyes in surprise. Wait, are you crazy? You're going to take a stranger to your house? Lucia also looked surprised. You don't have to do this. Daniel squeezed the key between his fingers. I know. Jason shook his head in disbelief. Daniel, you don't even know this girl. Daniel looked at his friend, his voice firm. What if it were you? What if one day you woke up in a cold place without knowing who you were, with no one in the world? Jason opened his mouth but didn't answer. Lucia felt her heart beating fast. No one had ever done anything like this for her. Her eyes began to fill with tears, but she blinked quickly, trying to hold them back. Daniel held out the key again. Are you coming? Lucia took a deep breath, and her hand still trembling, took the key. It was at that moment, after so long, that she felt she was no longer alone. Daniel's house was small and simple, filled with books everywhere. Lucia entered slowly, holding the key between her fingers, as if she still couldn't believe she was there. The smell was different from the warm amphitheater, with a slight aroma of coffee mixed with old paper. Daniel closed the door behind her and pointed to the sofa. You can sit down. Lucia hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the sofa and sat down slowly. The soft fabric was a contrast to the cold metal table she had been sitting at hours earlier. She looked around, observing the shelves full of books on anatomy, medicine, and forensic cases. Daniel went to the kitchen without saying much, opened the refrigerator, took out some ingredients, and began to prepare something. The sound of the knife cutting the vegetables filled the silence. Lucia watched him from a distance, feeling out of place. You didn't have to do this. Daniel continued cutting. Do what? Bring me here? Cook? For me? He paused for a second, then continued with what he was doing. You need to eat. Lucia looked down, moving her hands over her lap. I don't know when I last ate. Daniel paused again. That sentence struck him in a strange way. He looked at her sitting there, so fragile and yet so strong for fighting to remember who she was. Then let's fix that now. Shortly after, he put 2 plates on the table and pulled out a chair. Lucia bent down across from him. The smell of the food made her realize how hungry she was. She picked up her fork and took her first bite. It was just a simple dish of rice and meat, but when the flavor spread through her mouth, her eyes lit up. "My God, this is incredible." Daniel smiled a little. "I'm not a great chef, but I know how to make a few things." Lucia laughed softly. "Compared to what you were probably eating before, well, before all this is a feast." He saw her laugh and felt something in his chest, something warm, something he didn't know how to name. Silence fell between them for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a different kind of silence, one that didn't need words. Lucia finished eating and rested her elbows on the table. "Do you live alone?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. And your family?" She looked away. "We don't talk much." Lucia noticed that there was something there, something he didn't want to talk about, but she didn't press him. She looked at her own hands and ran her fingers over her wrist, as if searching for something that was no longer there. "I remember the bracelet, but I don't remember anything else." Daniel noticed the way she touched his arm, as if she felt something was missing. Maybe the memories will come back little by little. Lucia let out a heavy sigh. "And if they don't?" He looked her in the eyes for a moment. "Then we'll create new ones." Lucia felt a lump in her throat. The man who, a few hours ago, was about to perform an autopsy on her, was now giving her a plate of food, a roof over her head, and, in some way, a little bit of hope. She smiled a small, shy smile. The next morning, Daniel was in the kitchen making strong coffee. He hadn't slept well. He spent the night thinking about everything that had happened, trying to understand how a woman who had been given up for dead simply woke up at his table. She stared at as if the coffee would give him an answer, but there was no answer. Lucia was still sleeping on the sofa. In the early hours of the morning, he had covered her with a blanket, and now she was breathing slowly, her hair tousled and falling over her face. She looked exhausted, as if her own body had to fight to stay there. The sound of the doorbell broke the silence. Daniel went to the door and opened it, finding Jason on the other side with a tense expression. "We need to talk." Daniel made room for him to enter and closed the door. "What's going on?" Jason held some papers as if they were the key to a mystery that even he didn't want to believe. "I spent the night investigating your case." Daniel crossed his arms, and Jason let out a long sigh before continuing. "The hospital never registered a death certificate with Lucia's name." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean, no? The hospital doesn't have any official documents saying she died either." Daniel's heart raced, but he was in the amphitheater. "At my desk. How is that possible?" Jason ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I don't know. All I know is that officially, that woman never should have come to you." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. "This doesn't make sense." "I know it, and there's more. Her body was found behind a hotel." "Right." Daniel nodded. "Yes. But there's no missing person report with her name, no family members looking for her, no police report." The coffee Daniel had drunk began to weigh heavily on his stomach. "Are you telling me that no one missed her?" Jason took a deep breath, or worse, that someone wanted her to be forgotten. Silence filled the room. Lucia was still asleep on the sofa. She was there, alive, breathing, but somehow the world seemed to want to pretend she never existed. Daniel looked at her and knew he couldn't leave her alone. Night fell heavily on Chicago. In Daniel's small house, silence filled everything. Lucia was on the sofa, curled up under the blanket. She had eaten little during the day and spoken even less since Jason brought the news. Something in her had changed. The weight of not existing in the world seemed to crush her. Daniel tried to distract her, talking about light-hearted things. But she just smiled sidelong and looked away. He didn't insist. Now he was in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes. The sound of the water running was the only noise in the room. He was tired. His head ached with so many unanswered questions. The phone rang. He dried his hands on his t-shirt and picked up the receiver. No number appeared on the screen. "Hello?" For a second, there was only silence. Then a distorted, hoarse voice, as if some kind of voice modifier. She should stay silent. Daniel frowned, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Who's speaking?" The voice continued, cold and emotionless. "Don't get involved in this." And the call was cut off. Daniel stood still, clutching the phone tightly. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He turned slowly and looked towards the living room. Lucia was asleep. Her breathing was calm, and her face was relaxed. But he knew that peace was only an illusion. Someone didn't want her to be there, and now he was involved too. He ran to the window, looked outside, and saw nothing. He made sure to close all the windows and doors tightly, and Lucia woke up in the middle of the night with a weight on her chest. The silence of the house was only interrupted by the distant sound of cars on the street. She looked around, feeling that strange feeling of being in a place that was not hers, but at the same time was the only place where she felt safe. She ran her hands over her face, trying to clear her thoughts. Every day, some memories came back, but always in pieces, loose pieces of a puzzle she did not know how to put together. Daniel was in the kitchen, sitting at the table, staring at a notebook. Lucia approached slowly. "You're not sleeping?" He looked up and smiled slightly. "Seems like you haven't either." She pulled up a chair and sat down. "My head is full." Daniel felt hers too. For a moment they sat there in silence. Then, as if something had been triggered inside her, Lucia closed her eyes and saw a scene. A man holding her arm, a strong grip, as if he wanted to prevent her from escaping, and one detail, the bracelet. Daniel frowned. "What?" Lucia opened her eyes, taking a deep breath. "The man who grabbed me was wearing a black bracelet. I remember that." Daniel wrote it down quickly. "Can you remember his face?" Lucia closed her eyes tightly, trying to remember, but it was like trying to hold sand between her fingers. "I only remember the bracelet." Daniel ran his hands over his face thoughtfully. The next morning, Jason arrived with his usual bitter coffee and a tired expression. "Any news?" Daniel wasted no time. Lucia remembered a detail. The man who held her tightly wore a black bracelet. She remembers feeling scared and wanting to run away. Jason took a sip of coffee and thought. For a second, that black bracelet could mean many things. Daniel got up and grabbed his jacket. "Then let's find out what it means." They spent the whole day calling contacts and chasing leads, looking for clues. They went to the hotel where Lucia worked, talked to former employees, looked for any information that might fit. At the end of the afternoon, Jason came back with something. "I think we have a name." Daniel looked at him intently. "Who?" Jason threw a file on the table. "Alexander Gutierrez." Lucia frowned. "Who is he?" Jason took a deep breath. "The son of the owner of the hotel where you worked." Daniel felt a chill. Lucia stood there as if his name had awakened something she couldn't quite grasp. Jason entered the police station with firm steps. Daniel and Lucia waited outside, sitting in the car. Lucia nervously clasped her hands. "If you don't believe me," Daniel looked at her calmly. "Jason knows what he's doing, but inside, things weren't going as they had hoped." Jason placed the file on the commissioner's desk. The young woman who was presumed dead and taken to the morgue. "Her case is more complicated than it seems." The commissioner looked up, leisurely glancing through the papers. "And what do you want me to do with this, Jason?" The man who was with her before she disappeared was wearing a black bracelet. "We did some searching and found a suspect, Alexander Gutierrez, son of the owner of the hotel where Lucia worked." The superintendent let out a low laugh and threw the papers on the table. "Gutierrez? You want me to investigate the son of one of the most influential men in Chicago because of a bracelet?" Jason clenched his fists. "There's a woman who almost died, and no one has bothered to find out what happened. Don't you think that's suspicious?" The superintendent sighed and settled back in his chair. "Look, we have more urgent cases to solve. Without concrete evidence, this will lead nowhere." Jason leaned over the table, losing his patience. "And what would concrete evidence be for you?" Her body was already in the morgue. The superintendent looked at him seriously, but he didn't die. Jason felt the rage rising through his body. "Are you telling me that because he survived, the crime doesn't matter?" The inspector took the papers again and pushed them back at him. "I'm telling you that I can't open an investigation based on your position." Jason clenched his hand into a fist, breathing deeply. "So as not to lose control, I'm going to find something." The inspector shrugged. "Good luck with that." Jason grabbed the papers and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Outside. He got into the car and threw the documents hard onto the dashboard. Daniel noticed immediately. It didn't go well. Jason snorted and ran his hand over his face. "They're not going to get involved in this. Not without evidence." Lucia lowered her head, feeling a pang of despair. "So it's over." Jason looked at her in the rearview mirror. "No," Daniel completed. "It just means we have to fix it ourselves." The night was silent, but in Lucia's mind, everything was chaos. The dark room, the distant noise of cars on the street, the sound of the clock ticking away the seconds. Everything made her anxiety grow. She got up from the sofa with a tight chest. The air felt heavy, as if it were suffocating her. She walked to the window, slowly pulled back the curtain, and looked outside. The street was empty, but what if someone was hiding? What if they were watching her? Her whole body was shaking. Daniel was in the kitchen reviewing reports, trying to find any clue about Alexander, about what had happened to her. But when he heard a noise in the living room, he looked up. Lucia was curled up in the corner with her knees against her chest, breathing too fast. He approached her, concerned. "Lucia." She didn't respond. Her eyes were wide open, filled with fear. Daniel knelt down beside her. "What's wrong, Lucia?" She tried to speak, but her voice came out weak. "Oh, I feel like there's someone outside." He looked out the window and saw nothing, but he knew that didn't matter. Her fear was real. "No one can hurt you here." Lucia shook her head and hugged herself. "They already did once." Daniel felt his stomach knot up. "You're not alone." Lucia closed her eyes tightly, trying to calm her despair. "I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going to happen to me." Daniel took a deep breath. "Neither do I." She opened her eyes, surprised by his response. Daniel continued, "But I promise I won't let anything happen to you." Lucia's eyes filled with tears. He seemed so sure, but she knew that deep down he was also afraid that they were fighting something too big for them. Without thinking, he took her hand. He didn't let go. He just squeezed it back. The two of them stood there in silence. Outside, Chicago went on with its life, but inside that house, in that small moment, she didn't feel so alone. Daniel knew he couldn't wait any longer. The police had ignored the case, pretending nothing was happening, but he couldn't do the same. Not when he saw Lucia waking up scared every night, looking over her shoulder, afraid that someone would come back to finish what they had started. He sat down at the table and spread out all the papers Jason had obtained about the hotel. Employee lists, old records, news articles. Something there might help them. Lucia watched from afar, hugging a cup of tea. She still felt lost, as if she didn't belong anywhere. She sighed and brought the cup to her lips. "You don't have to do this." Daniel looked up and saw her. "Yes, I do." Lucia felt a lump in her throat. Daniel spent the night analyzing the information. When he left, the sun had already risen. He had a plan. Later, he went to a distant neighborhood where he found the address of a former cook at the hotel. Doña Carmen opened the door with a suspicious look, drying her hands on her apron. "Who are you?" Daniel showed her his coroner's badge. "My name is Daniel Salgado. I need to talk to you about the hotel where you worked." Her eyes narrowed. "Why do you want to know that?" He took a deep breath. "I'm trying to help someone. A girl who worked there and disappeared." Carmen's face hardened. "If she disappeared, it's because she messed with the wrong people." Daniel noticed that she knew more than she was saying. "Please, I just need a clue." Doña Carmen hesitated for a moment, then looked around as if to check that no one was listening. "Before they fired me, I heard strange conversations." Daniel leaned in a little. "What kind of conversations?" She lowered her voice. "Alexander, the owner's son." Daniel felt a chill. What were they saying about him? Carmen looked at him seriously. He had secrets. Secrets that no one could discover. Daniel's stomach churned. He was on the right track. But he knew that the more he investigated, the more dangerous it would be. "I shouldn't be talking about this," she murmured, nervously fidgeting with her apron. Daniel leaned in a little closer, trying to convey confidence. "Doña Carmen, anything you remember can help us." She sighed and shook her head. That hotel looked perfect on the outside, but inside there was a lot of hidden dirt. Daniel waited. He knew that sometimes silence made people talk more than direct questions. The former cook lowered her voice even more, as if she were afraid that someone might hear, even though they were inside their own house. "Once, while cleaning the kitchen after an event, I heard Alexander arguing with another man." She hesitated for a moment, and then whispered, "Money and a woman." Daniel was on alert. "What woman?" Doña Carmen looked up at him. "I don't know, but I remember that Alexander was nervous. He said that no one could find out about his affair, that if his family knew, it would be the end. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He was having an affair? Doña Carmen nodded. Yes, but it wasn't just that. There was something else. A dirty business, some money, many hidden things. Daniel ran his hand over his face, and Lucia's face darkened. If she knew something, then she was in danger. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He finally had a concrete clue, but now he needed to find out exactly what Lucia saw that almost killed her. Lucia held the teacup in her hands, but the liquid had already cooled. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the thoughts filling her mind. Daniel was sitting across from her, his eyes fixed on her. He knew she was fighting something inside herself. What do you want to do? Lucia pressed her lips together, staring at the dark liquid in the cup. I don't know. Daniel waited. She took a deep breath before continuing. Part of me wants to understand everything, to find out why they tried to kill me, to find out who did it. But the other part, she lowered her head, her voice trembling. The other part just wants to leave. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Where? Lucia let out a bitter laugh. I have no idea. Maybe another Chicago, another country, a place where no one knows me. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then his voice sounded firm. If you run away, you'll live in fear forever. Lucia closed her eyes. He continued, you don't know who tried to kill you, and if they find you again, you'll spend your life looking over your shoulder, not knowing when it will happen again. A lump formed in her throat. And if I never remember everything, and if I never know the reason? Daniel rested his elbows on the table and looked her in the eyes. Then we'll find out. Lucia blinked, surprised by the we. Daniel noticed and smiled a little. You're not alone in this. Lucia's eyes began to burn. All her life she had faced things alone, but now there was someone there. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart racing. If I stay, I could put you in danger. Daniel shrugged. And if you leave, it may be too late to protect you. Lucia lowered her head. Her thoughts weighed heavily on her. But deep down, she knew she couldn't run away. She had to face the truth, no matter how difficult it was. The days passed, but the weight of the truth did not become any lighter. Daniel immersed himself completely in the investigation. He spent hours reviewing documents, looking for connections, trying to find something that would lead them to Alexander. He slept little and ate even less. With each new clue, he felt he was getting closer. Lucia tried to move on. She began going out alone, walking through unfamiliar streets, observing Chicago as if looking for a place for herself. She bought new clothes, cut her hair, and tried to look like someone who could start over, but none of that changed how she felt inside. She looked at Daniel and saw someone who never stopped, who was obsessed with the truth, and somehow that made her feel guilty. One night, when Daniel came home, he found Lucia sitting on the sofa with her legs crossed, staring at a fixed point on the wall. You're not sleeping, he asked, taking off his coat and leaving it on the chair. Lucia smiled a little half-heartedly. Neither are you, he sighed, running his hand over his face. I'm close, Lucia. I know I'm close. She turned her face towards him, and then, what happens when you find out everything? Daniel remained silent. Lucia swallowed hard and lowered her head. You know that even if we find out everything, it's not going to go away, right? He sat down next to her. What's not going to go away? She hugged herself. This feeling, this fear. Daniel looked at her intently. Do you think you'll never be able to get rid of it? Lucia took a while to answer. I think maybe a part of me will never be the same. Daniel wanted to say something, wanted to promise her that everything would be all right, but he knew he couldn't do that. He couldn't lie to her. The silence between them became heavier than before, and it was at that moment that Lucia realized they were drifting apart. He was sinking deeper and deeper into that search, and she was trying to convince herself that she could move on without looking back. But deep down, they both knew that this story was not over yet. Daniel came home late that night. Exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders, but his mind would not stop. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but something was still missing, something big. As he stepped into the small hallway of the building, he noticed a white envelope on the floor right in front of the door. His heart raced. He looked to the sides. The hallway was empty. He heard nothing. There were no strange noises. He bent down slowly and picked up the envelope. It had no sender or name, just a piece of paper folded with something inside. With a knot in his chest, he went inside, locked the door, and turned on the light. Lucia was sleeping on the sofa, curled up under the blanket. Her breathing was calm, but Daniel knew that her sleep was never deep. He opened the envelope with trembling hands, and then the air disappeared from his lungs. It was a photo of Lucia asleep on the sofa, on her sofa in her house. His blood ran cold. Someone had been there. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, trying to control the fear, rage, and despair that overwhelmed him. He took a deep breath and looked at Lucia. She had no idea of the danger that still surrounded them. He clutched the photo tightly, feeling his heart beating hard in his chest. It was no longer a hidden threat. It was a clear warning. They were being watched. Lucia held the photo with her hands trembling. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted from side to side as if looking for an exit that did not exist. "They know where I am." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, trying to stay calm. He knew this moment would come. Lucia dropped the photo on the table and ran her hands over her face, breathing rapidly. "I have to get out of here." Daniel frowned. She began to pace from one side too, her fear growing with each step. "I can't stay. If they got in here once, they can do it again. They could be watching me right now." Daniel stood up and tried to approach her, but she took a step back. "Lucia, calm down." She shook her head. "There's no calm. This isn't going to stop. They'll keep coming after me until they catch me." Daniel saw the tears forming in her eyes and felt his chest tighten. "Where would you go?" Lucia bit her lip as if trying to hold back the tears. "I remembered some things, random things. Clothes, objects, people. I think I have a grandmother who lives far away from here. No one knows about her. I can leave, disappear." Daniel swallowed hard. "Run away?" She ran her hand through her hair nervously. "Maybe it's the only option." He took a deep breath and spoke firmly. "And you think hiding will change anything, Lucia?" She looked at him with eyes full of fear. "He's going to keep me alive." "Alive?" Daniel clenched his fists. "And you're going to live like that, running away, looking over your shoulder every second?" She closed her eyes tightly. "I don't know, Daniel. I just know I don't want to end up dead." Silence filled the room. Daniel approached slowly. "Do you trust me?" Lucia hesitated. Daniel took her hand gently. "I won't let anything happen to you." She looked at him, and a tear rolled down her cheek. Daniel wiped it away with his fingers and whispered, "Don't go." Lucia's heart begged for it to be true. She wanted to believe, but there was still time to do so. Daniel's phone rang in the middle of the night. He woke up with a start, his heart still heavy from everything that had happened that day. Lucia was sleeping next to him on the sofa, but even in deep sleep, her face showed concern. He grabbed his mobile phone and saw Doña Carmen's name on the screen. "Doña Carmen's..." Her voice sounded hurried and a little hesitant. "Daniel, I'm sorry to call you at this hour, but I remembered something." Daniel sat up, feeling a knot in his stomach. "What happened?" On the other end of the line, she sighed deeply before continuing. "Before I left the hotel, there was a man who always showed up there. No one talked much about him, but every time he arrived, Alexander and his dad would get nervous." Daniel frowned. "Who was he?" There was a brief silence. "They called him Torres." The name fell like a weight on Daniel's chest. He got up quickly and began to pace the room, trying to put the puzzle together in his head. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure. That man had power. He knew everything that went on there." Daniel thanked her and hung up, grabbing his car keys. Lucia stirred on the sofa and opened her eyes. "What's going on, Daniel?" He looked at her, his mind working quickly. "Maybe we found someone bigger than Alexander in all this." Minutes later, Jason opened the door, looking sleepy, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt. "Daniel, it's 3 a.m. Daniel entered without waiting for an invitation. "I need you to tell me everything you know about a man named Torres." Jason blinked several times, trying to wake up. When the name made sense in his head, his expression changed. "Torres, yes." Jason closed the door and rubbed his face. "Torres. He's not just anyone. He's one of the most influential businessmen in Chicago, but everyone knows he's involved in dirty business." Daniel crossed his arms. "Like what?" Jason snorted. "Fraud, bribery, money laundering. He has powerful friends and enemies who disappear." Daniel felt a chill. Jason pointed at him. If he's involved in this, we're dealing with something much bigger than we thought. Daniel looked at the floor, feeling the weight of it all now. It made sense that the police didn't want to investigate. It made sense about the photo on his door. They weren't just taking on Alexander. They were going after someone much more dangerous. Jason spent the whole day making calls, looking for information, checking files, and the more he found out about Torres, the clearer it became why no one wanted to get involved in that case. When night fell, he went to Daniel's flat, knocked twice, and entered without waiting. His face was serious, his eyes tired. Daniel and Lucia were sitting at the table with maps and notes everywhere. As soon as they saw Jason, they knew he had discovered something. Torres isn't just a corrupt businessman. Jason threw a pile of papers on the table. He has the entire system in his pocket. Daniel took the documents and began to review them, feeling a chill. What did you find? Jason crossed his arms and took a deep breath. He has connections with important people. Judges, police officers, politicians. If any investigation gets too close, he pays to make it disappear. Lucia hugged herself, feeling her chest tighten. So that's what happened with my case. Jason nodded. Exactly. You didn't disappear by chance. They erased you from the records because they knew that if you came back, you could destroy everything. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. That's why the police don't want to help. Jason let out a bitter laugh. They don't want to, and they can't. If they investigate, they'll lose their jobs, or worse. Lucia felt tears burning in her eyes. So there's nothing we can do. Jason looked at her, and his expression softened a little. Not if we play our cards right. Daniel looked at his friend, understanding what he meant. If we can't go to the police to make it public. Lucia blinked in surprise. How? Jason took his phone out of his pocket and turned it between his fingers. I know a journalist, someone who isn't afraid of powerful people. Daniel nodded. Lucia, on the other hand, hesitated. What if they come after us? Jason looked her straight in the eye. They already have. Silence filled the room. Lucia lowered her head. Daniel reached out his hand across the table and touched hers, squeezing it gently. This time we'll do it right. Lucia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew they were about to cross a line of no return, but deep down, she also knew that running away had never been an option. The telephone rang, breaking the heavy silence in the house. Daniel opened his eyes, feeling a tightness in his chest even before answering. Something inside him already knew that this was not just any call. He got up slowly, careful not to wake Lucia, who was sleeping on the sofa next to him. Her breathing was calm, but her face still showed traces of the worry that never left her. He picked up the phone and answered without saying anything for a few seconds. There was only silence on the other end of the line. Then a cold, distorted voice echoed, "Stop looking, doctor." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "Who is this?" he continued, too calm. "You're digging a hole you're not going to get out of, but you can still leave in peace." Daniel gripped the phone tighter. "If you think I'm going to stop, you don't know me." There was a short pause. "Then maybe you need an incentive." Daniel felt his heart beating faster. "What are you talking about?" The answer came coldly. "Either you stop, or Lucia will really end up in your morgue." Daniel's blood ran cold before he could answer the call. It cut off. He stood there still, his breath caught in his chest. Lucia was still asleep, unaware that her life had just been put to the test once again. Daniel felt rage take hold of him. Lucia looked out the car window as the road passed quickly before her eyes. The sky was cloudy, and the cold wind seemed to match how she felt inside. Fear still accompanied her, but now there was something else. A weight on her chest, a feeling that perhaps she was making the wrong decision. Daniel drove in silence, respecting her space. He knew that this trip was important, that Lucia needed this moment. When they arrived at the small house in the countryside, her heart raced. Her grandmother Rosa's house was simple, with exposed brick walls and a small but well-kept garden. Time passed slowly there. Lucia got out of the car and walked to the door. She barely had time to knock because the door opened and Rosa appeared. Her face, marked by the years, lit up when she saw her granddaughter Lucia. The young woman felt tears well up in her eyes as she was in a tight embrace, the only hug she had left from her family. I thought I would never see you again, my girl." Lucia closed her eyes and held back her tears. After they went inside, Rosa served tea, as she did on every visit. Daniel remained silent, observing everything, respecting the moment. Lucia took a deep breath, gathered herself, and began to speak. She told everything: the hotel, what she saw, how she woke up in the morgue, how they tried to erase her from the world. Rosa listened without interrupting, her gaze calm but full of pain. When Lucia finished, her hands were shaking. Her grandmother took her hands firmly. "Daughter, running away is not living." Lucia looked down. Rosa squeezed her hands. "But if you're going to fight, fight with intelligence." Lucia felt a lump in her throat. "I'm afraid, Grandma." Rosa caressed her face tenderly. "Fear doesn't go away, child, but if you let it control you, you'll never come out of the shadows." Lucia looked at Daniel, who was watching her patiently, waiting for her decision. She knew Rosa was right. Maybe she would never stop being afraid, but she could learn not to let it stop her. Jason knocked impatiently on the table with his knuckles. His face was tense, his eyes restless, as if his mind was moving too fast for his body to follow. Daniel and Lucia sat in front of him, waiting for him to speak. The silence in the room was heavy after the conversation with Rosa. Lucia looked more determined, but the fear was still there, hidden behind her eyes. Jason took a deep breath before saying what was on his mind. "I've thought it through, and it's the only option. We're going public." Lucia frowned. He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "If we go to the newspapers, if we expose his relationship with the hotel family, with Alexander, people will start talking. That will force the police to act, even if they don't want to." Lucia ran her hands over her face, trying to take it all in. "But isn't it too dangerous?" Jason looked her straight in the eyes. "Lucia, do you think there's still a way back?" She felt a lump in her throat. Daniel took her hand on the table and squeezed it gently. "They already know we're following them. Now we either face this, or spend the rest of our lives running away." Lucia closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. When she opened them, her voice was firm. "Then let's do it right." Jason smiled with satisfaction. "I already have the right information. Now we just need to make sure everyone sees it." Jason's plan was ready. The journalist already had all the information, the evidence, the names. In a few hours, everything would come to light. She should feel relieved, but what she felt was something else. A suffocating fear. "I need air." Her voice trembled. She got up quickly, walked out the door, and stopped in the small hallway of the building. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, as if she were short of oxygen. Jason noticed it immediately and went after her. Lucia shook her head, trying to hold back the tears, but it was impossible. Her whole body was shaking. She just wanted a normal life. "Jason," her voice broke, "I just wanted to work, to live in peace." Jason felt a lump in his throat. Lucia closed her eyes, and the tears finally fell. "I never asked for this. I never wanted to be part of a dirty game. I just wanted to live." Jason didn't think twice. He took a step forward and hugged her tightly. Lucia didn't resist. She clung to him as if she were falling apart. "I'm tired. I'm so tired." Jason closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that moment. "I know." She cried silently, and each tear carried everything that she had been holding back for days. The fear, the pain, the helplessness. Jason stroked her hair and whispered, "If we do this right, maybe you can make it." Lucia took a deep breath against his chest. Maybe it was true. Maybe there was still a way for her. But at that moment, she just wanted to believe that one day she would wake up without fear. The night was silent, but no one could sleep. Lucia, Daniel, and Jason sat in the small room with the glow of the television illuminating their faces. The journalist spoke in a firm voice, with a serious tone, like someone who knows he is about to change the fate of many lives. "We have just received exclusive documents linking businessman Anthony Torres to a series of irregularities, including bribery, corruption, and, even more seriously, unsolved disappearances." Lucia grabbed Daniel's arm without realizing that his hands were cold, and his chest was rising and falling slowly. Images began to appear on the screen images. Photos of Torres with politicians, suspicious bank transactions, testimonies from former hotel employees, and then a name. In addition to Torres, the documents indicate the direct involvement of Alexander Gutierrez, son of businessman Ricardo Gutierrez, owner of the renowned Imperial Hotel. Jason let out a heavy sigh. There it is. Lucia covered her mouth with her hand. The report continued. The journalist talked about how dirty money circulated within the hotel, how cases of missing women were linked to the same name. Daniel stared at the screen. There was no turning back. Lucia blinked, still trying to take it all in. That's good, right? Jason nodded, but did not seem relieved. It's good, but it also means that Torres is going to react. Daniel ran his hand over his face. Tired. Now what? Jason turned off the television and looked at them both. Now we wait for the chaos to begin. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Social media was full of the news. Television channels repeated the report every hour, and journalists surrounded the police station demanding answers. Lucia followed everything from her mobile phone, sliding her fingers anxiously across the screen. Every new comment, every new headline made her chest tighten more. Torres was slow to speak out, but when he finally appeared, he looked serious, his face controlled like a man who had already escaped from worse situations. Worse. The press conference was broadcast live. He sat in front of the microphones and spoke in a firm voice. These accusations are absurd. I have always been an honest businessman, a man who creates jobs and contributes to the growth of this Chicago. This is nothing more than a desperate attempt to tarnish my reputation. Lucia pressed her lips together. Daniel, sitting next to her, shook his head. He's playing the victim, Jason snorted. Of course he wants to divert attention, but the press was not convinced. A reporter stood up and asked loudly, Mr. Torres, how do you explain your name being linked to cases of disappearances? The businessman forced a smile. I don't explain it because it's not true. Another journalist insisted, what about the suspicious bank transactions? Torres looked at his lawyer, who quickly replied, there are no irregularities. Everything will be cleared up. Lucia felt a chill running down her spine. He's evading the questions. Jason smiled sardonically, and the more he did so, the worse it was for him. The press conference lasted only a few minutes, but the damage was already done. The public did not believe Torres, and the police, who had previously ignored the case, were now under too much pressure to continue pretending that nothing was happening. In the afternoon, a new headline appeared. Police open formal investigation into Anthony Torres and his suspicious connections. Lucia put her hand to her mouth in surprise. Daniel read the news aloud. They can no longer pretend they didn't see it. Jason crossed his arms with satisfaction. Now he's no longer in control of the game. Lucia let out a long sigh, not knowing if it was relief or fear. Torres was cornered, but a man like him would not accept defeat so easily. The news of Anthony Torres' summons spread like wildfire. The headlines showed his name. Journalists surrounded the police station, and reporters stood guard outside his house for the first time. He could no longer hide behind his money. He tried everything. He made calls to influential people, tried to delay the statement, looked for loopholes in the law. But this time there was no easy way out. There were too many eyes on him. On the appointed day, he arrived at the police station wearing dark glasses and an impeccable suit, accompanied by 3 lawyers. He did not speak to the press, and did not look at. But inside the interrogation room, his confident posture began to crack. That same day, Alexander was also called in. He arrived more nervous, without his father's arrogance. The press also surrounded him, but he seemed more concerned about something else. He sat in front of the investigators, trying to remain calm, but when they began to press him about the fraud at the hotel, his mask began to slip. The questions became more difficult to answer, and then he made the mistake. I already said it. I wasn't even at the hotel that night. The investigator raised an eyebrow. But in your first statement, you said you spent the night at the office solving a problem. Alexander froze. For a second, silence filled the room. The investigator smiled slyly. You just contradicted yourself. Outside the room, Alexander's wife watched the interrogation on a monitor screen. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know everything her husband was doing, but at that moment, she understood that he was hiding something bigger. When the investigators mentioned a suspicious bank transaction in the name of an unknown woman, she felt her heart race. "Who is that woman?" Her voice came out low. No one answered, but she already knew. The betrayal was right before her eyes. Furious and disgusted, she got up and left the police station. But before leaving, she took her mobile phone and made a call. "I have information that may interest you." On the other end of the line, a journalist smiled, unaware that his own wife had just betrayed him. Alexander asked to go to the bathroom. 2 police officers accompanied him to the door, but when they left him alone for a few minutes, he saw his only chance and fled. He left through the back, took a car from the car park and sped away without looking back. By the time the police realized, it was too late. The news of his escape spread. Now, in addition to being a suspect, he was a fugitive, and the police would have no choice but to hunt him down. News of Alexander's escape spread quickly. Headlines exploded on social media, and the police had to act. Now, in addition to being a suspect, he was officially a fugitive from justice. Lucia watched television with her heart racing. Alexander's image appeared on the screen, along with the word "wanted." Daniel stood beside her with his arms crossed, and his gaze fixed at the screen. Jason entered the room with his mobile phone in his hand and a serious expression on his face. "We have something big." Daniel and Lucia turned to look at him. Jason placed some documents on the table. "We found evidence that Alexander was directly involved in your disappearance, Lucia." She felt a chill. "How?" Jason pointed to the papers. "Bank transactions, hotel records, witnesses. Everything connects him to that night. He was there when they took you." Lucia felt her stomach churn. Daniel took the papers and analyzed every detail. "It's enough to arrest him." Jason nodded. "Yes. And now, with him on the run, things were getting worse for his side." Hours later, the news arrived. Alexander had tried to leave the country. He used false documents and paid a pilot to take him in a private jet, but the police were already waiting for him when he arrived at the airport. Surrounded by security guards and believing he would escape, they surprised him. Police officers came out from all sides. "Alexander Gutierrez, you're under arrest." He tried to run, but there was no way out. They handcuffed him right there in front of cameras, journalists, and passengers who watched in shock. The image of him being led away, his face sweaty and his eyes full of despair, was seen across the country. That same night, Torres appeared in public at another press conference, another desperate attempt to save his image. "My partner made mistakes, and he will answer for them, but I have nothing to do with this." Daniel snorted. "Damn him." Lucia looked down. "He'll keep denying it until the end." Jason crossed his arms. "Let him deny it all he wants. Now there are too many people watching." Torres was no longer untouchable like before, and for the first time, he knew it. Night fell, but Lucia couldn't sleep. She was on the sofa, hugging her knees, staring at the television, which was turned off. The room was silent, but her mind wouldn't stop. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of tea. From a distance, he noticed her lost gaze. "You don't have to pretend you're okay." Lucia blinked slowly and let out a humorless laugh. "I don't even know what it means to be okay anymore." He put one of the cups on the table and sat down next to her. Lucia ran her hands over her face and sighed. Alexander was arrested, but what about Torres? He's still out there playing the victim. Daniel took a sip of tea and looked her in the eyes. He can't run away forever. Lucia swallowed hard and looked away. Men like him don't go to prison so easily. Daniel gently took her hand. But now he knows that the world is watching him. She looked at him, and her eyes shone with exhaustion and fear. Daniel squeezed her hand firmly. She's not alone in this anymore. Lucia felt the tears welling up, but she didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The fear was still there, but for the first time, it wasn't greater than her desire to move forward. Jason entered Daniel's flat with a folded newspaper in his hand. He threw it on the table and crossed his arms. "We did it." Lucia took the newspaper with trembling hands and read the headline aloud in a low voice. "Police open investigation into Anthony Torres after new allegations." She looked at Daniel as if she needed confirmation that it was real. Daniel nodded slowly. "There's no turning back now." Jason pulled up a chair and sat down. "And there's more." After the report, Other hotel employees started talking, people who were fired without explanation, women who disappeared and no one looked for, accountants who knew about fraud but never dared to report it. Lucia felt a chill in her stomach. They were waiting for someone to take the first step. Jason nodded. Yes, and that person was you. She looked down, feeling a lump in her throat. She had never thought about it. She had never seen herself as someone strong, but somehow her name was now linked to the beginning of something big. Daniel noticed what she was feeling and touched her hand. You survived, and that's why you're saving other people. Lucia closed her eyes and held back the tears. Perhaps there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt she was heading in the right direction. With each new piece of news, it became clearer that he no longer had the same power as before. Companies that did business with him began to cancel contracts. Politicians who had previously smiled alongside him in photos now denied any relationship with him. Influential friends disappeared. Daniel was sitting on the sofa checking his mobile phone when a new headline appeared. Investors withdraw support for Torres after corruption allegations. He looked at Lucia, who was in the kitchen making coffee. He's going down. She turned slowly, holding the cup in her hands. But he's still free. Daniel nodded. Yes, but not for long. Lucia took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, she felt the air entering more easily. Jason entered the flat with a tired smile. Believe it or not, Torres is trying to play the victim. He says the press is persecuting him. Daniel rolled his eyes. The same old story. Jason threw his keys on the table and took an apple from the fruit bowl. The difference is that no one believes him anymore. Lucia sat down at the table and looked at them both. That means it's coming to an end. Jason shrugged. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he's already lost. Lucia held the cup tightly. The fear was still there. The memories were still present. But for the first time, she felt something different. Peace. A fragile peace, as if it could vanish at any moment. But it was real. She looked out the window at Chicago outside, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. She could feel it. She was alive, and that was all. Lucia sat on a small park bench, feeling the cold wind on her face. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with orange tones. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel afraid to be alone. She looked at the people, the children playing, the couples holding hands, life going on, and then she realized something she had never thought of before. She too could move on. Daniel arrived shortly afterwards with 2 hot coffees. He sat down next to her and handed her a cup. What are you thinking about? Lucia held the coffee with both hands, as if trying to absorb the heat in everything that had happened. What comes next? Daniel watched her in silence, waiting for her to continue talking. She took a slow sip and looked at him. I don't want to be just the girl who survived. Daniel frowned a little. You've never been just that. She sighed. But that's how I see myself, as someone who was torn from her life and then thrown back without knowing what to do. Daniel put his coffee aside and turned to look at her better. What do you want to do? It took Lucia a moment to respond. I want to study. I want to do something that helps other people. Daniel smiled slightly. Medicine. She let out a low laugh. God forbid. I've had enough death in my life. Daniel laughed with her. Lucia looked up at the sky thoughtfully. Maybe psychology or something related to human rights. People like me, who went through what I went through, need someone to listen to them. Daniel felt a warmth in his chest when he heard that. Lucia wasn't just trying to survive. She wanted to turn her scent into something bigger. He took her hand and intertwined his fingers with hers. You're going to be incredible, Lucia. She smiled, feeling her heart grow lighter. She was still afraid. She still had scars that no one could see. But now, for the first time, she felt that she could build something new, something that was hers alone. Daniel stood in front of the door for a long time. The cold afternoon wind blew against his face, but that wasn't what made his chest tighten. It was the past, what that door represented. He hadn't seen his father in years, not since the day he quit football, not since their last argument, not since he turned his back and decided to follow his own path. But there he was, his hands sweating, wondering if he should really knock. Lucia had insisted that he go. It doesn't have to be a big reconciliation. but maybe it's a way to close that door inside you. And now he was there. He took a deep breath and knocked. Silence. On the other side, it lasted a few seconds. Then the sound of footsteps. The door opened. The man in front of him looked smaller than in his memories. His hair was grayer. The wrinkles were deeper. But the eyes were still the same. Daniel's father stood motionless, looking at him as if trying to believe what he was seeing. Daniel's voice came out hoarse, as if his son's name had been stored in his throat for too long. Daniel took a deep breath. "Hello, Dad." The silence was heavy, but not hostile. The man stepped aside and opened the door wider. Daniel crossed the entrance and saw that few things had changed. The trophies were still there, the old team shirt framed on the wall, the photos from the glory days. They sat at the kitchen table. His father served coffee, as he always did. For a few minutes, no one said anything, only the sound of spoons stirring the liquid, until finally his father broke the silence. "I never thought I'd see you here again." Daniel smiled a little. "Me neither." His father took a sip of coffee and looked at him more closely. "You're different." Daniel nodded. Time does that. The silence returned, but now it seemed less heavy. His father sighed. "I put too much pressure on you, I know." Daniel looked down at his cup. "I could have tried to understand your side, too." The man smiled slightly. "You never liked football, did you, Daniel?" He laughed softly. "I liked it, but not the way you wanted me to like it." The man nodded slowly, as if he were understanding that for the first time. "I wanted you to be a great player, because it was the only thing I knew how to do, Daniel." He looked at him and saw something he had never seen before: regret. His father ran his hand over his face and laughed without humor. "But you found another path, and from what I can see, you became a better man than me." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Dad." The man raised a hand, interrupting her. "Just know that I'm proud of you." Daniel blinked several times, trying to control the lump in his throat. He had waited so many years to hear that, and now that he had heard it, he realized he no longer needed it. He already knew who he was, but hearing it from his own father meant something. The two of them sat there, sitting in silence, drinking coffee. They didn't resolve everything. They didn't erase the years of distance, but for the first time, they took a step towards forgiveness, and that was enough. The golden afternoon sun painted the grass a deep green. The wind was cool, and the distant sound of children playing mingled with the rustling of the leaves in the trees. Lucia was in the yard, watching Daniel sitting on the terrace, distracted by a book in his hands. She picked up the ball she had bought earlier and smiled to herself. "Doctor," she called, spinning the ball between her fingers. Daniel looked up and frowned. "What's that?" Lucia walked over to him and threw him the ball. Daniel caught it reflexively, but with a confused expression. "I want to see if you still know how to play." He laughed and shook his head. "I already told you, I don't play anymore." Lucia crossed her arms and took a step back. "Then just throw it back." Daniel threw the ball, but Lucia quickly dodged it and let it roll across the yard. "Aren't you going to pick it up?" he asked, laughing. "You miss it, Daniel." Daniel was silent for a moment. Then, without thinking too much about it, he took the first touch, then another, and another. His feet remembered. His body remembered. Lucia smiled. "You still know how, Daniel?" He laughed and passed her the ball with a light touch. "Maybe a little." Lucia tried to control the ball, but she stumbled a little. Daniel ran to hold her before she fell. Their faces were close. Lucia took a deep breath, feeling her heart beat faster. "You can play, Daniel. You can enjoy it. This doesn't tie you to the past." He looked her in the eyes for the first time in years. He felt like not only playing, but living, feeling life beyond the cold corridors of the morgue. "I want to live, Lucia." She smiled. "Then live." Daniel brought a hand to her face, feeling her warm skin beneath his fingers. Then, without haste, without fear, he kissed her. It was a soft, shy kiss, but charged with something that both of them had tried to deny for a long time. It was real. Months later, at Rosa's house, Daniel and Lucia stood facing each other, surrounded by a few people, but the right ones. The simple courtyard was decorated with flowers, and Rosa held a handkerchief, discreetly drying her tears. Daniel looked at Lucia with shining eyes. Lucia smiled. They had survived. They had fought, fallen, and risen again. And now, there, under the open sky, in front of the people who really mattered. They chose each other. When Daniel took Lucia's hands and whispered his vow, his voice trembled a little. "I choose you." Lucia smiled, feeling tears run down her face. "Me too." They kissed, and the applause was lost amid the sound of their hearts beating together. It was real. It was love. It was a new beginning. The door to the flat opened slowly, creaking a little on its hinges. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of the flowers Lucia had brought that morning. Daniel entered first, carrying 2 boxes in his arms, while Lucia followed behind, holding a pot and some folded clothes. They looked at each other and laughed. The place was small and modest, but it was theirs. Daniel put the boxes on the floor and looked around. "There's nothing here." Lucia smiled, leaving the things on the counter of the tiny kitchen. "That's why they call it a new beginning." He sighed and shook his head. "I never thought I'd be here one day." Lucia crossed her arms and leaned against the door frame. "Me neither." Daniel looked at her. "Do you miss your old house?" She was silent for a moment, looking around at her surroundings. The walls were still bare, the sofa was old, and the refrigerator made a strange noise, but her heart felt light. "No, Daniel." She smiled a little. "Me neither." She approached him and took his hand. "This is something I never had." Lucia intertwined her fingers with his. "A home," Daniel nodded. "A home." They stood there quietly, simply feeling the moment. Neither of them knew for sure what would come next, but for the first time, that didn't matter. What mattered was that they had each other, and that was all. The soft morning light streamed through the window of the small flat. Lucia was in the kitchen, calmly stirring her coffee while she listened to Daniel moving boxes in the living room. There were still things to organize, but for the first time, there was no rush. She looked around and smiled. The space was still simple, but little by little, it was coming to life. The aroma of coffee mingled with the light perfume of the flowers she had placed on the table. The radio played an old, quiet song. Daniel appeared in the doorway with an old book in his hands. "Did you bring this?" Lucia turned and laughed when she saw the worn cover of the storybook she had read as a child. "My grandmother gave it to me when I was little. She always said that beautiful stories help the soul to rest." Daniel opened the book and turned the pages. "It makes sense, Luke." She took a cup and handed it to him. "What do you think is coming next?" Daniel blew on his coffee before answering. "I think what we decide to build is coming." She smiled. "I like that." He raised his cup as if to toast. Then, a toast to what comes next. Lucia raised hers too, to what comes next. The silence between them was comfortable. Daniel put his cup on the table and looked her in the eyes. "Are you still afraid?" Lucia took a deep breath deeply and thought before answering. "Sometimes, but not like before." He took her hand on the table. "You did it, Lucia." Her eyes filled with tears. "We did it, Daniel." He smiled and wiped away a tear that had escaped. "Yes." The phone rang, breaking the moment. Lucia looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. She took a deep breath before answering. On the other end of the line, a calm but uncertain female voice asked, "Are you Lucia?" "Yes." "Who's speaking?" There was a short pause. "I saw your story on television. I went through something similar, and I don't know what to do." Lucia felt her heart race. She looked at Daniel, who was waiting silently. She didn't hesitate. "Let's talk." The past couldn't be erased, but it could be given new meaning. The greatest victory wasn't just surviving, it was starting over, and now helping others do the same. If you were in Daniel's place, would you take Lucia home or hand her over to the police? Write your comments below, and let's discuss the rest of the story together. And if you enjoy exciting stories like this, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Tomorrow, a very powerful and touching story awaits you.